Good morning. Welcome to the Deep 404. There's a lot to talk about in Ukraine. There is a lot going on there today. I'll start covering off a couple of the recent threads that we've been going over. US Secretary of Defence Lloyd Austin. We don't have any update, any pictures, any video of Lloyd Austin still. So we're still in this sort of holding pattern where we have the official line that he's been in hospital for weeks, being released 2 days ago to home, still undergoing care and treatment for a urinary tract infection after his prostate cancer surgery. But we've seen no images of him yet. We've only had reports that he's had phone conversations with others. So we'll continue to follow that one up and just see what happens there. The two American Navy SEALs in the Gulf of Aden, who allegedly, during a nighttime boarding operation, one fell into the water, the other jumped in to assist, which is apparently their policy. Still no word on them or the location of them or their bodies or anything like that. The US and John Kirby being very clear to say, oh, this has nothing to do with what's recently happened in Yemen. This is just the normal activities in the area, boarding ships looking for things that might be problematic going to Iran or coming from Iran. I had some people send me some comments about this, suggesting allegedly, one of these people allegedly, that they had been in the SAS, and which is like a UK land-based equivalent, not the SEALs, but on the army. Anyhow, just suggesting that there were some things which they thought were unusual about the story, and they think there's more to the story. I can't say, but I'll continue to keep an eye on it. The other recent thread, the alleged shoot down of the Russian A-50 or AWACS type aircraft. Again, at this stage, there just doesn't seem to be any real indication that this has happened. There does seem to be indication that an Aleutian IL-22, a airborne command centre, did return to base with damage and injuries to crew members, or at least to a crew member. There's been, as I'm aware, no official report yet from the Ministry of Defence about that. There was allegedly a photograph showing the tail of that IL-22, which, if that photo was valid, then would indicate what appeared to be sort of fragmentation damage from some sort of air defence. Now, the question then remains, was it a Ukrainian missile or was it a Russian missile? And there's certainly been talk about it being a Russian friendly fire attack. So this is on the IL-22. On the A-50, the original claim is 2 planes were shot down. There just doesn't seem to be anything that I can find convincing at this stage about the A-50, but again, I'll keep an eye on that. Look, in Ukraine, like the title of this video today, Ukraine is dying. After following this conflict for some time now, it's just starting to get that feel that the nation itself, you can just see things happening to it which aren't good indicators for Ukraine. Declining birth rates, declining school entry numbers, declining school leaving numbers. There are all of these sort of things. I'm just going to go through some of the items today which have just come out, which are relating to Ukraine, starting with the Ukrainian mobilisation. So the Verkhovna Rada yesterday has adopted the second reading of the bill. And there are some concerns that have come out about this. One of them being that the Ukrainian Defence Ministry has said that the bill would give the right to place its IT systems in military cloud facilities of NATO member states. And there will be the creation of this bill, with this bill, the creation of a register of the militarily liable. So people who are considered capable of fighting or being mobilised into the military, it will take information about them without their consent. So some of the information that will be taken here, so this will be for all people it seems, between the ages of 17 to 60 years in Ukraine. It'll take standard information like your full name, your address, your place of work, telephone numbers, email addresses, information on foreign language skills, information on your right to own a weapon, your driver's license details, information about the parents of the person who is liable for military service, details of internal and foreign passports, taxpayer identification number, information on travelling abroad. Now, that doesn't say what that information is, if that is historical information of where you have travelled to in the past, information on your criminal convictions. It will also contain a digital image of the person liable for military duty. And so the concerns of some of the members of the Verkhovna Rada are that this information will be stored on a NATO cloud servers and not within Ukraine. So now, this, what you would consider to be sort of sovereign Ukrainian information about its people and the Ukrainian military, will all be shared and housed and possibly just controlled by NATO. Now, there's a lot of information there. A lot of people would say, well, so what? The government's already got that. Yes, the government probably does have a lot of that information in disparate systems. I guess the concern here is that the individuals haven't ever put their hand up and said, hey, I'd like you to scoop all of my data that you've got, anything you can find out about me, put it all together and go and put it in another nation's database so that UK knows all that about me. So I think that's probably the concern. And I think to put it into context, if we look at the security guarantee, which Rishi Sunak has just announced that the UK is going to provide to Ukraine, I went through this in a video a couple of days ago. I provided a link to it there if you want to have a read. One of the features in there that, in a many-page document, I don't know, maybe 16 pages of a PDF, right up the front, item number 7, it specifies that in this security agreement that the UK is what it will provide to Ukraine. Item 7 is that Ukraine will provide military support to the UK if needed and if required. And so now you start to pair this up with all of the data about all of the military liable people within Ukraine sitting in NATO servers. You know, I don't think it's a very big leap to think that Grant Shapps in the UK is looking at this and going, great, I now know about everyone that we can draw upon in Ukraine, all their information, all their skills, all their background, criminal history, the ability to, if you wish to, nefariously leverage those people for some purpose or another to say, hey, we know this happened to you, we can make it public or we can tell these people about it, whatever it might be. And these things do happen, blackmail occurs. Anyhow, I'm not suggesting that the British government would blackmail someone. I'm just saying the opportunity exists if suddenly the UK, for example, has all this information about all these Ukrainians from the ages of 17 to 60, and Ukraine has signed up to a security guarantee where they have agreed that they will support the UK if it comes to it. So there's that happening within Ukraine at the moment. In terms of support for Ukraine, there's growing opposition to support for Ukraine and the conflict. German politician Sarah Wagenknecht said that the West needs to stop supplying weapons to Kiev to start negotiations. She's quoted as saying, "We were always told we must supply weapons so that Ukraine's negotiating position would improve. Then the opposite became true. The negotiating position today is worse than it was 2 years ago." Her statement possibly coming out on the reiteration from President Putin in the last day or so that the Ukrainians and the Russians had effectively put pen to paper in a settlement deal back in March and April of 2022, which would have seen a conclusion of the war at that stage and the avoidance of all of the death and destruction, simply with the agreement on some of the eastern oblasts as becoming part of Russia and the NATO leadership agreeing to not become members of, the Ukrainian leadership agreeing not to become members of NATO. Now Boris Johnson turned up shortly after that, allegedly, and kiboshed that deal. And I think now we are seeing that politicians are becoming aware of this. German politicians, opposition politicians, are recognising the position their government has put them in with the massive amount of funding and military equipment that they've sent to Ukraine, how that has all come to naught for them, how what was supposed to have been the weakening of Russia and the empowerment of Ukraine has gone the other way, and that we now have people in Germany suggesting that they need to prepare for war because Russia is going to grow to such a strength that it's going to gobble up Ukraine and then come after Poland and Germany next. I personally don't think that is the case at all, but you can see now how people in Europe must be scratching their heads and going, hang on, we gave all these billions of euros to win this war. We're not winning, and Russia's somehow going to come after us and be stronger now. So certainly opposition political parties in Germany now starting to say we should stop giving money to Ukraine. We've got to negotiate. Not just Germany, Slovakian opposition too. A Slovakian member of parliament, Radalski, said yesterday, if we do not stop supplying weapons to Kiev and continue to support the murder of Slavs in Ukraine, we Slavs will unite and raise Western Europe to the ground. So I think this is very strong language, but basically, the Slovakian people in the Slovakian parliament saying this is enough. We need to stop funding Ukraine, giving weapons to Ukraine. This is just causing Slavs to kill Slavs, and we are simply becoming the vassal of the United States in this scenario. And getting to the point where he's saying that if it continues, which he believes is being driven in Europe by the Western states, Germany, that sort of thing, that the Slavs will eventually have enough of this and they will join forces and turn around back onto those Western states. So, an indication here from within the Slovakian government that they can see a internal European conflict within Europe, not with Russia, arising if this continues for too long. Continued challenges for the EU to manage cohesively their response to this conflict. Slovakian Prime Minister Fico, he has come out in support of Hungarian President Orban and President Orban's right to retain his voting rights within the EU. The EU at the moment is petitions are being put forward to take away or strip Hungary's voting and veto rights within the EU because the EU would like to give another $50 billion to Ukraine €50 billion to Ukraine in support of their war with Russia. Viktor Orban and Hungary said, no, we don't want to do it. We think it's a waste of money. We want to understand where the money's going. They believe that a lot of the money is just purely being lost through corruption in Ukraine. And so they're putting their foot down and saying no. The EU, other members who wish to give this money to Ukraine, are now starting to say, oh, we've got to strip them of their voting rights. And Fico from Slovakia has now come out and said, I won't support that. I will support Hungary in retaining their rights in the EU. So infighting beginning in the EU as well, a number of areas. The problems here are still, for Europe, are still continuing, though. There's video I saw yesterday, which is reportedly showing a whole trainload, carriage after carriage, of US Stryker armoured personnel carriers heading to the border of Belarus, heading to the Polish border with Belarus. What this means, I don't know. The Poles have been putting troops on the border with Belarus throughout this entire conflict. Belarus have been putting their troops on the border with Poland. This has been an ongoing thing. Whether this is purely just a saber rattling and a show that, hey, we've got a whole heap of these pieces of equipment, we're sending them your way, calm down. Could it be part of something like Steadfast Defender, the NATO exercises that are starting in February in a couple of weeks' time? Steadfast Defender is going to see 40,000 troops from 30 NATO nations operating around Poland and Germany. There'll be UK aircraft carriers and F-35s in the area. And they're going to be practicing war scenarios and war games. They'll be pretending that they are fighting Russia. Germany, Poland and the Baltic states is where the activity is going to occur. That's going to be followed by similar exercises called Nordic Response, which will involve 20,000 troops, 14 countries, 10,000 Norwegian troops, Norway, Finland and Sweden being the primary area of those exercises. That's going to involve a lot more naval activity. 50 more ships, including aircraft carriers, submarines, frigates, amphibious boats. 110 or more fighter jets, helicopters and their associated support aircraft. And that will have come just after the joint warrior exercises conducted by the Brits in the sea between Scotland, Norway and Iceland. So that's all coming in February and March. So maybe this movement of equipment up north towards the Belarusian border is perhaps part of something that's part of these exercises, or it may be more. Now, while I don't believe this is directly connected, interestingly, yesterday, perhaps in response, the Belarusian Defence Minister, Viktor Krenin, said that the Belarusian government will approve a new security doctrine, which for the first time will cover the activation and use of tactical nuclear weapons transferred last year from Russia. So Russia has provided those tactical nukes to Belarus, positioned them in the country there. Now Belarus moving forward and saying, okay, we're going to sign into law a new security doctrine, which means that if X happens, we will activate these. As I say, may not be related, but came out on the same day, it seems, as this video appeared showing all of this US NATO equipment being moved to the Polish border with Belarus. There is still aid, coming to Ukraine. It hasn't dried up entirely, but it is certainly not of the scale that it has been in the past. French President Emmanuel Macron has reported at a press conference yesterday that Ukraine will be supplied with about 40 long-range Scalp missiles and several hundred bombs in the coming weeks. What I don't know about this, where he said long-range Scalp missiles, is if he is referring to the supply here of French domestic versions of the Scalp missile. Often what happens with missile technologies, a country produces a missile and they will have a higher spec version used for their domestic use, and what they export will be a downgraded specification. So in the case of the like the Germans and the Taurus missiles, the German Taurus missiles that they export might have a range of 200 kilometers. The domestic versions have a range of 500 kilometers. So with President Macron here saying 40 long-range Scalp missiles, I don't know if he's just referring to the normal Scalp missiles, the same ones that have currently been provided to Ukraine, or if this is an indication that the French are looking to step up the supply of what they are providing. I could be completely wrong on this, but my general read would be that these will be the same type of Scalp missiles as sent previously, and that President Macron at this stage would not be interested in being the person to be the first to really extend the supply of long-range missiles to Ukraine. The reason that the US, the UK, the Germans and the French to this stage haven't sent the long-range ones is that they fear that the Ukrainians will use them in areas of Russia which have always been considered Russian territory, that they will reach out to Moscow or something like that with these long-range missiles, which they believe will then be seen as, or will draw an escalation from Russia And they are concerned about that. They believe that the tit for tat that would arise if Ukraine were to use, for example, UK long-range missiles to attack Moscow, that Moscow would then retaliate in kind and attack the UK with long-range missiles. That's something which the UK government, Rishi Sunak, doesn't want to happen. He's got an election coming up in 6 months' time. It'll be a struggle for him to win that as it is. He certainly doesn't want to be trying to go into that war with London being struck by Russian missiles. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think this is what people consider to be one of the reasons why these longer range NATO weapons haven't been provided to the Ukraine yet. Anyhow, Ukraine is getting some Scalp missiles, it seems, coming in the coming weeks. Germany has also released a military package. It contains a lot of nuts and bolts kind of things, some of the larger pieces that it contains. And again, this just reflects the decrease in the amount of aid that is going to Ukraine. They're providing 15 Gepard self-propelled artillery pieces, or guns, 3 self-propelled guns. They're providing 20 Marder infantry fighting vehicles. They're providing 700 battle helmets. That's 700, not 700,000. And they're providing ammunition for the Leopard 1 tanks. As I say, other lots of little rats and mice things, but not a large and substantial package. No big tanks in there, no big artillery pieces, no vast numbers of 155mm shells. These sort of things will not make any real difference to what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. But as I say, the aid does continue. Obviously, the UK, Rishi Sunak, mentioning in that security guarantee, though, he's committed to providing £2.5 billion worth of aid in 2024 to the Ukraine. And in an interesting comment, again, from Antony Blinken. Now, I saw this again, him speaking yesterday. He said this a week or 2 weeks ago as well. But US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, I think he's caught in a position here where he can't, whatever he says can be read the wrong way. But he has confirmed again that the $60 billion that they are asking Congress to approve for Ukraine, that $60 billion isn't really going to Ukraine. This $60 billion is going to the US. This is going to be used all in America, and it's going to create these weapons in America and create jobs for Americans. So he's selling this, that look, we're not really giving money to the Ukrainians, we're giving money to ourselves. It's creating jobs for us. That's good for us, and we'll get all these weapons. Of course, what he's not saying here is that the conflict in Ukraine is therefore good for the US. If that conflict in Ukraine wasn't happening, they wouldn't be producing the $60 billion worth of weapons in the US. As I say, things just not good for Ukraine. The US will get these weapons. They may go to Ukraine in the future. They may go to Israel. Who knows? They may just stay and be used by the Americans. But the Ukrainians are having to continue this fight and lose their men in order for the likelihood of this aid to be coming to Ukraine. It's just another one of those elements adding to the rather rapid now downfall and destruction of the country of Ukraine. Even Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, in an interview yesterday, has commented that he sees the conflict in Ukraine as turning into a war of attrition. Now, everyone else has said this for a long time, sort of up until now. I think Jens has been trying to promote the narrative that the Ukraine is doing well and being successful, their offensive was successful, and Russia's on the back foot. Now it's turning to a war of attrition. He says this means that now we not only need to deploy new systems, but also think about having enough ammunition, enough spare parts. I mean, honestly, this guy is a character. They need to start thinking about having enough ammunition now. For 6 months, at least, it has been known that the NATO nations and the US were going to be unable to provide the level of ammunition that Ukraine needed to be able to sustain its offensive and actually make ground in its offensive. So there's all of that going on, and then I start. If we start to look a little bit about, just for a moment, flip over to Russia. Russia is making moves in Africa. The Deputy Defence Minister, General Alexander Fomin, and Colonel General Yunus Bek Yevkurov have met in Niger with their Minister of National Defence, General Salifoy Modi. They are looking to combine their actions to stabilise the situation in the region and have acknowledged the significance of growing Russian-Niger relations in the defence sector. They are committing to maintain positive communications and improve combat readiness of the Republic of Niger's armed forces. Now, this is an interesting move because until about July of last year, so 7 months ago, France and the US, but France was the predominant military partner of Niger. France got about 17-18% of its uranium from Niger. That supply was stopped when the coup occurred in July. France just recently exited its military presence from Niger, and we see here now not France somehow patching up that relationship and mending those fences and being allowed back in. Instead, we see the Russian military in there talking to them, strengthening ties there. Likely we will see, I would expect at some stage, a growth in Russian forces and Russian bases in the area. This also provides Russia with access to another uranium supply, which would have previously been going at very cheap rates to France. Russia, I would imagine, looking at ensuring resources across the world, Africa rich in many resources, going in now with happy military economic work. I'm sure that the Nigerians will be happy to sell uranium to Russia if Russia was after it. Also, the Central African Republic, which is another country within the centre of Africa, is asking Russia to build a military base on their territory. And they've already allotted a special lot of land for this purpose. This statement was made by Fidel Guanjica, who is advisor to the president for the CAR, or the Central African Republic. He said, "We would like the Russian Federation to build its military base in CAR. The government has already provided a plot in Baringo, 80 kilometres from the capital Bangui, where there is an international airport. It would," he has said, already has some barracks there, and once infrastructure is completed, it will be able to accommodate 10,000 Russian soldiers. They would like to see the Russian military there to teach our soldiers to be disciplined, to respect human rights, and teach our soldiers to protect the territory, because the Russian Federation is the leading nuclear military power in the world. Mr. Fidel Guanjica believes there is no country in the world that can dominate Russian military. So growing relations for Russia in Africa, as we see Western nations, France being pushed out of areas that they have traditionally held power over for many years. So, and he gives some of the reasoning here. We are 1,000% committed to Russia, and we believe that the Russian Federation should stay with us. If Russia leaves us today, we will be eaten by the Westerners who have been with us since independence and have done nothing for our country. So Russia has an opportunity here, whether it chooses to take it in good faith and actually build these nations, build relationships, and through that strengthening of trade and respect and friendship, gain access to those resources and a foothold in those areas. Who knows if Russia will do that? But they seem to have the opportunity to do that. Certainly the the African nations feeling that that has not been the approach that the Western nations have taken with them in the past. So, I guess we will see what happens there. In terms of an update, just moving to an update of the front line of what's happening in Ukraine, there's talk if you look at some of the big YouTube channels, if you look at Dima and Military Summary, if you look at Weeb on Weeb Union, that there's a big Russian sort of offensive starting. I'm not sure that there is a big Russian offensive starting just yet. What I think we might be seeing is that the Russian forces have reached a stage where they are able to now, with their excess of artillery and ammunition and at least a matching now of numbers of troops, and combined with the recent weeks of missile strikes on the Ukrainian rear echelon, on the assembly, repair and maintenance facilities, that all of that combined, perhaps what has happened is that the Defence Minister of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, has said, take your advances, take your steps and move forward. I don't think that this is the large offensive push. We haven't seen anything announced like that by Russia itself. Instead, I think they have just reached a level of confidence where they are happy now to move forward where they can. And the Russian forces are dominant across the line, as I say, in terms of artillery and ammunition. It sounds like drone technology and numbers of drones. I would suggest in morale as well. And now at least equal in numbers along the front line, with Ukraine struggling in its supply, whereas Russia's supply lines, as we were saying before, the Ukrainians aren't using long-range missiles on them, so the Russians are resupplying. We had reports early this week that the Russians are able to rotate very rapidly their troops. Keeps morale up, keeps people fit, keeps the health of your units high. So I think that we might just be seeing a natural push. It's like an arm wrestling competition where you don't necessarily see the one big swat, but you do start to see the slow movement as one side is doing what it can to stop, but the other is just overpowering it, and we're starting to see that movement forward across the line. And we look, and I guess part of the reason I'm saying that is because we seem to be seeing these advances in positions all across the front line, good activity for the Russians, but we haven't seen any big offensive setups in areas to allow for a dramatic offensive to take place. So I think we'll look at this over the coming days and weeks, and we'll see what happens. But I imagine we will just see this sustained slow movement of the Russians. In terms of some Russian reporting of some of the areas in the front line, in the Kherson direction, there's difficult weather conditions, which has reduced the intensity of the Ukrainian combat operations. This is from like at least sort of 12 hours ago. I'll go through just after this with the Russian Ministry of Defence update, which will update some of this. But weather conditions bad, which we've known for some time. Reports of many of the Ukrainian soldiers who have been captured there suffering badly from frostbite. Yeah, they're saying here that in Krinky, the Russian forces have managed to reach the coastline. I had another report that I saw this morning that in Krinky, the Russians have now raised their flag in the centre of the Krinky area. Krinky is a small settlement on the eastern side, or the left-hand bank of the Dnieper River, the Russian-controlled side, where the Ukrainians have for a number of months now continued to try to get forces across and establish a beachhead there. And while they have managed to keep forces there, they haven't expanded it or had any tactical or strategic success launching from that area in Krinky, but have lost a lot of men. This Russian report says the Ukrainian garrison is decreasing in numbers. It has become quite difficult for them to replenish it. We've had this corroborated by Ukrainian reports of a Ukrainian soldier who was fighting in Krinky and had been rotated back out of Krinky. And he was interviewed and spoke about this and the difficulties they have with resupplying, replenishing, and even evacuating their dead and wounded from Krinky. In the Zaporozhye direction, there are no major changes in the front line. Counterfighting from the Ukrainians is also limited by the bad weather conditions. In South Donetsk direction, there is fighting in the heights near Urozhine. Russian forces have recaptured a number of positions north of Kremenchuk and Staromalinovka. A counterattack by the Ukrainian forces near Zavetnoye Zelenyi was repulsed in Mariinka sector. The Russian army is pushing the enemy garrison at Novomykolaievka. Plus, Russian advance towards Kurakhovo from the eastern outskirts of Georgievka has been reported. In the Donetsk direction, Russian forces attacked the armed forces of Ukraine on the northern outskirts of Avdiivka. There is footage of partial defeat of our equipment in one column. Unfortunately, it says, unfortunately, the Ukrainians published footage of a partial defeat of our equipment column. So still, as I say, there is still strong defence from the Ukrainians, even though overall I believe they're being pushed back. In the Gorlovka sector, our troops have advanced at Shumi, and Ukrainian is responding by shelling the rear of that advance. In the Bakhmut, or Chormys direction, the Russian artillery is preparing to storm a landing of the hill northwest of Bogdanovka. This is where the main Ukrainian forces are. The Ukrainians are holding onto this site. After its capture, they will have to retreat from Bogdanovka, which is located in a lowland. The next village on the way to Chasov Yar is also under fire of our artillery. Now, it has been some time since the Russians have been trying to get past Bakhmut, past the west of Bakhmut and towards Chasov Yar. Chasov Yar itself, a difficult location to take, a very fortified location. To the north, our forces advanced at Grigorovka. Further north in the Seversk sector, Russian forces are entrenched in the landings near Belogorovka, and the Russian attacks have intensified. Moving up then towards the Krasny Liman and then up to Kupiansk area. In the Svato direction, in the Kremenaya forest, Russian forces have advanced a little, but it is difficult near Terny. The Ukrainian mortars and artillery are working from the heights, slowing down the advance of the Russian army. In the Kupiansk sector, Ukraine announced the evacuation of about 26 villages in close proximity to the front. So we see that the Ukrainians are defending as best that they can. Not a whole heap of reporting from the Russians of Ukrainian advances, but certainly defence in areas where the Ukrainians hold the higher ground, which is obviously an advantage. But overall, this general report, to me, just sounding quietly confident. It's hard work, of course, but the Russians are just grinding forward. So doesn't seem as though they're on the back foot. Some tactical losses in Avdiivka, a column, some damage done to one of the Russian columns on their attack, some shelling of the rear of another attack, as you would expect. But overall, no great concern, it seems, from them there. I'll just go through now the Ministry of Defence, Russian Ministry of Defence update for the last 24 hours on the fighting along the front line. As I always say with this is Russian Ministry of Defence figures. Take it with the level of scepticism that you feel is warranted for this. I use this reporting because it is consistent. We receive these each day, and you are able to back up some of the information given by the Russian Ministry of Defence if you take the time to go and look at some of the channels which will geolocate destruction of equipment. So when the Ministry of Defence suggests that an M777 or a Polish crab has been destroyed in an area, you can go and see that that has been reported by other sources. Anyhow, starting in the north, there's Kupiansk direction where the units of the Zapad group of forces operate. They've repelled one attack by the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or the AFU, their 95th Air Assault Brigade near Terny. The reported losses for the Ukrainians are 30 Ukrainian troops, 2 armoured personnel carriers, 3 motor vehicles, no artillery losses recorded in Kupiansk. In Krasny-Liman direction, where the centre group of forces operate, they have repelled 3 attacks by the Ukrainians in the areas around Chervenaya Dibrova and Yampolovka, and in the Grigorovka. Reports of Ukrainian losses are 210 servicemen killed or wounded, 1 tank destroyed, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 2 motor vehicles, and 1 D-30 howitzer. In the Donetsk direction, where the Yug forces are operating, they have reportedly repelled 6 attacks in the last 24 hours near Belogorovka, Krasnoye, and Bogdanovka. Damage was done to the Ukrainian 22nd, 28th and 42nd Mechanized Brigades near Kleshevka, Kurimovka and Andreevka. The Ministry of Defence of Russia reports the Ukrainian losses at up to 290 troops killed or wounded. The Russian Ministry of Defence has stated in the past that it estimates troop losses based upon intercepted Ukrainian communications. Also in Donetsk, 1 tank, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, 5 armoured fighting vehicles, 12 motor vehicles, 2 D-30 howitzers and 1 Pion self-propelled artillery piece were destroyed. Very heavy fighting, as you can see, still around the Donetsk area. In South Donetsk, where the Vostok group of forces are operating, 75 Ukrainian troops reported killed and wounded, 2 motor vehicles destroyed, 1 D-20 howitzer and another self-propelled Gvozdika artillery system. In Zaporozhye, in this area, losses to the Ukrainian troops are reported to be 25 troops yesterday, 3 motor vehicles, 1 D-30 howitzer. And then finally in the Kherson direction, this is where Krinky is, as a result of strikes of the 35th and 37th Marine Brigades near Tyaginka and Ivanovka, the armed forces of Ukraine losses amounted to 25 Ukrainian troops, 3 motor vehicles, and 2 Gvozdika self-propelled artillery systems. So in yesterday's fighting, the reports are 655 men killed or wounded on the Ukrainian forces side. If you extrapolate that out over the course of 7 days, that's 4,500 men. We had a higher number yesterday, reported the day before, of 990. The day before that, I think it was 790. So continued sustained losses across the front line that are high for the Ukrainians, if you believe these Ministry of Defence numbers. But as I say, the Ministry of Defence numbers come out at a daily estimate, average daily estimate, less than 1,000 killed and wounded per day for the Ukrainians. A member of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, this week, an interior minister came out and he stated that he believes that the Ukrainian losses are 30,000 a month or 1,000 a day. So that Ukrainian statement from a Ukrainian politician estimates a higher number of killed and wounded than the Russian Ministry of Defence itself is estimating. So read into that what you will about the veracity, perhaps, of the Ministry of Defence claims. Anyhow, large numbers continuing to be lost. 9 artillery pieces recorded lost yesterday, nearly half of them, 4 of them self-propelled. As I've said, over the last few days, we've seen what feels to be an increase in the number of self-propelled artillery pieces reported as being destroyed. This may indicate a number of things. It may be that the number of fixed artillery pieces are being diminished, and the Russians are now free to go after the mobile pieces, the self-propelled ones. And the fact that they are being struck is an indication that the Ukrainians are losing artillery firepower and maybe struggling to replenish it. As we've said, those recent attacks on repair and maintenance facilities by the Russian missiles will be specifically aimed to degrade Ukraine's ability to take damaged frontline pieces and repair them. So while they may have pieces of artillery that need maintenance, there's nowhere to maintain them. They're now looking at ways to ship them out to Romania and Poland to maintain and repair them, which is slowing things down and leading to the Ukrainians losing more artillery in this conflict. I'll just turn a little bit now, just finish off here for this Ukrainian update. I will do a Middle Eastern update shortly, just after this. It should be up online just after this one. But President Putin giving a Q&A talking about the economics of Russia. He says Russia's economic resilience is sufficient to move forward. The country's military capabilities are growing, contributing to its strength. The expected economic growth for the year is 3.5%, recovering from the downturn and taking a significant step forward. Unemployment stands at 2.9%, a historically low figure for Russia. This is due to the war footing that Russian economy has taken, which means that it is producing more domestically. Everyone's employed working for the war effort, that kind of thing. Russia's external state debt is decreasing from 46 billion to 32 billion. So it's a significant decrease on the reliance of international funding and debt which Russia needs to pay back. Again, becoming more self-sufficient financially. Inflation in Russia may accelerate to 8% by the end of the year, but measures are being taken by the central bank and the government to return it to target levels. Investment growth in Russia's fixed capital is 10%, ensuring sustainable development. Enterprise profits in Russia have increased by 24% this year, and banks have earned around $3 trillion, or $3 trillion. I shouldn't say dollars, it's not clear what he's speaking about here. Real wages in Russia are expected to grow by about 8% by the end of the year, and real incomes of the population will increase by approximately 5%. So, strong economic growth in Russia, number of factors leading to this, some which sort of boomeranged on the West. The sanctions on Russian oligarchs and where they could invest their money saw a lot of them take their money out of Western locations, leaving them with nothing to do with it but invest domestically in the Russian economy. This has helped the Russian economy grow. Of course, the Russian government helping grow with the military expansion. But all of this leading to a lot of domestic economic activity. Also, the Russians looking to produce domestically goods which they would have previously purchased from other nations overseas, wanting and needing to move away from that reliance on foreign nations. They are now producing things like semiconductors and chips and all of that sort of thing domestically rather than purchasing them from foreign nations. Then just finally, again, President Putin talking about what had happened with Ukraine and the Ukrainian situation. As I said, there's a lot of bad news for Ukraine, not just on the front line, but all around it, economically, financially, in terms of its people, its morale and birth rates, all these sort of things. But President Putin said, Ukraine refused to negotiate with the Russian Federation. Morons. It would have been all over long ago. Here he's talking about the conflict and the damage being done to Ukraine. Ukraine's counter-offensive has failed. The initiative is entirely in the hands of the Russian armed forces. If things continue as they are now, Ukraine's statehood could be dealt an irreparable and very serious blow. And this, I think, is sort of just summarising the position that Ukraine is getting to, that they are just shuffling along now and being destroyed. They're like a sick corpse, almost just moving along, but no real health to them. Ukraine's statehood I think, again, President Putin saying that if negotiations don't happen soon, then the Russians will advance as far as they wish to go, take those eastern oblasts, take Mykolaiv and Odessa, deprive what remains of Ukraine of any access to the Black Sea, and really turn what remains of Ukraine into a rump state. And this is a terrible thing to happen to any nation, a terrible thing to happen to Ukraine. And reading between the lines here, President Putin, he's not cheering this on. He seems to be almost lamenting it and saying that you guys are idiots. You should have just negotiated when you had the chance. All of this could have been avoided. But if you don't, and if you continue with this, you will just continue to see your nation wrecked. Okay, I'll leave that here today. I'll go and do the Middle Eastern update after this. Look, I hope you're enjoying these reports. If you are, please share them with other people who you think would enjoy them. And I hope you have a good day. I look forward to talking to you again soon.